I still remember the exact moment she called me a loser. It was raining, cliché as that sounds, and we were standing outside of the diner where we used to dream together. Two broke kids in a small town whispering about big lives that never seemed to show up, and when she said it, "You're just a loser, Ryan," it wasn't even loud or angry, just flat, dismissive, like flicking lint off her coat. And then she turned and walked away, heels splashing in the puddles. And I stood there soaked to the bone, heart shredded, breath caught somewhere between begging and disbelief. But I didn't call after her. I didn't run, I just let her go. Because something in me knew that moment would change everything. That her cruelty would become the fire under my skin, and it did. It really did, because in the 3 years since that day I have built a life out of spite and ambition and relentless silence. I took every ounce of pain and swallowed it until it turned to fuel, and every gym session, every sleepless night coding in a cramped apartment, every shitty job I took while studying algorithms on the back of napkins, it all added up to the moment I bought the very company she used to mock me for applying to, and then the next startup, and then the estate on the hill with the glass windows and marble floors that echoed like success. And when the agency sent over a list of temporary staff to help maintain the house while I traveled for a conference, I didn't think much of it until I saw her name, Madison Lane, the same elegant cursive she used to sign her college essays with, and I stared at it for a long while, unsure if it could really be her, if the world was cruel or poetic or maybe just perfect in its chaos. And the first time she came through that door, dressed in the uniform the agency required, her hair tied back in a bun I used to run my fingers through, I almost choked on the irony. Because she didn't recognize me, not even a flicker, and maybe I looked different now. Leaner, sharper, no longer the guy who skipped haircuts and wore hand-me-down jackets. But part of me thinks she just never really saw me at all, not even when we were in love. And I watched her move through my house like she was tiptoeing through someone else's dream, dusting surfaces I had chosen, scrubbing floors I paid for, wiping down mirrors that now reflected a man she discarded like junk mail. And still, she didn't know. She smiled politely, called me sir in that soft voice that once begged me to stay in bed a little longer on Sunday mornings, and I played along, kept my name off everything visible, let her assume the man who lived here was away on business, just another ghost in a mansion full of secrets. But I was there, always just out of view, watching, listening, remembering every insult, every moment she dismissed my dreams like they were soap bubbles. And yet, part of me ached, not out of love, but out of some warped nostalgia, the kind that makes you want to reach into the past and rewrite it. And it's strange how grief and vindication can live in the same body, how I could feel both triumphant and hollow as she unpacked groceries in my kitchen and hummed the same song she used to sing while brushing her teeth, and I wondered if she had any idea, any inkling, if the smell of my cologne on the hallway coat rack triggered anything in her, or if the signed photo on the desk she dusted a gift from the CEO she once called unreachable was just another decoration to her. And I watched her laugh with the gardener one morning, that easy, carefree laugh I used to live for, and I felt something twist inside me, not quite jealousy, more like a phantom limb twitching with memory. And still I said nothing, because I wanted to see how far this could go, how long she would walk through my world unaware that the man she deemed a failure was the architect of everything around her. And maybe it was cruel, maybe it was petty, but it felt like justice, like a quiet, surgical kind of revenge that didn't need to scream or break things, just exist and burn slowly. And the longer she stayed, the more I started to see the cracks, the tired way her shoulders sagged when she thought no one was looking, the way she lingered over the family photos on the mantel as if longing for a life that slipped through her fingers. And sometimes I wanted to reach out, to say, "It's me, Madison, the loser you left in the rain." But then I'd remember the way she laughed when I told her about my startup idea, the way she said, "No one's going to invest in your pipe dream," and how she kissed another man 2 weeks later, posted it online like a victory lap. And I'd bite my tongue, grip the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white, and remind myself that patience is the deadliest form of power, that silence is the sharpest blade. And I began to wonder what would happen when she found out, what her face would look like the moment the truth hit her. Would she cry, apologize, beg, or would she scoff again, call it coincidence or luck? And would I even care by then, or would I just watch her walk out of my life a second time, this time carrying a vacuum instead of my heart? She didn't come to work the next day, or the day after that, and I told myself it was for the best, that maybe this was the cleanest end we could hope for, a moment of truth followed by silence, like a story finally allowed to rest. But by the third day, I felt the hole she left behind like it was carved into the walls themselves, the echo of her footsteps gone, the absence of her quiet humming like a phantom in the corners. And I kept pacing the house like a man who'd misplaced his soul, checking my phone more times than I want to admit, rereading the last thing she ever said to me, that maybe she didn't deserve forgiveness, and maybe I didn't either. And I started thinking about the past differently, not as a weapon, not as a wound, but as something soft and aching, something fragile and buried under too many layers of pride. And I remembered her eyes when she said she was angry back then. How I used to think her leaving was some act of cruelty, some calculated insult meant to break me. But now I saw it for what it was: fear, confusion, the kind of self-hate that makes people hurt the ones who love them the most. And I realized I hadn't built this life in spite of her. Not really. I'd built it to prove something to the boy she broke. But that boy was long gone now. And what remained was a man who didn't know if he wanted revenge, or closure, or just one more conversation. And then a week later, there was a knock at the door. And when I opened it, she stood there, hair damp from the drizzle, coat clinging to her arms, holding something in her hands, one of my journals, the same one she read in the library, and she said, "I kept this. I didn't mean to, but I couldn't stop thinking about it, about you." And I stepped aside and let her in, and she walked through the house like it was the first time, slowly, reverently, as if the walls whispered to her now. And when we sat down in the living room where so much had unraveled, she looked me in the eye and said, "I'm not asking you to forget. I just need you to know, I see you now, all of you." And it hit me harder than anything she ever said, because that was all I ever wanted. Not validation, not admiration, just to be seen, to be known. And I told her I believed her, and she asked if we could talk. Not about the past, not yet, but about now, about who we were today. And we did, for hours, about music, about books, about what it felt like to fail and to survive and to rebuild from ashes. And somewhere in those words, I stopped feeling like a man waiting to be avenged and started feeling like a person who could begin again. And it wasn't a clean healing. It wasn't fireworks or apologies wrapped in perfect bows. It was messy and real and full of long silences. But she kept showing up after that, not as staff, not as penance, but as someone trying. And one evening I asked her if she ever thought we could have made it if things had been different. And she said, "No," and smiled. Because if things had been different, we wouldn't be here now. And I understood what she meant. That all the pain and distance and years apart had forged something deeper than what we had before. And I stopped thinking of her as my ex. Stopped labeling her as the girl who called me a loser. Because now she was just Madison again. Complex and flawed and brave in ways I never noticed before. And as we sat outside under the evening sky with the city lights glowing below us, I realized I didn't need her to hurt anymore. I didn't need to hold her mistakes like armor. Because healing wasn't about watching someone suffer. It was about letting go of the knife you've kept in your own hand too long. And maybe this wasn't love. Not yet. Maybe it never would be again. But it was real, and it was honest. And it was ours. And when she reached for my hand, I didn't flinch. I didn't hesitate. I just held it. Steady and warm. And in that moment, I knew that I had finally, fully, completely won, not over her. Not over the past, but over the part of myself that believed I wasn't enough, and I didn't need to prove it anymore. Not to her, not to the world, and not even to myself. I started dreaming about her again, not in the way I used to, not those sweet, reckless dreams filled with kisses and laughter and hands held beneath blankets. But something more raw, more fractured. Dreams where she stood in front of me crying, and I couldn't reach her, where she screamed my name in the rain and I just stood there, stone-faced, unable to move. And every morning I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. Her ghost living inside my bones now, not haunting me with guilt, but with confusion. With the weight of what we might have been if we'd both been a little more patient, a little less proud. And I realized the revenge I'd been feeding for years had turned into something else entirely. Something quieter, more painful, something like mourning. And I couldn't keep pretending this house was just bricks and luxury, because now it felt like a trap. Like a stage where I kept performing a version of myself that wasn't even real anymore. And she kept showing up, every day, sometimes humming, softly to herself, sometimes silent and solemn, but she was always there. And I could tell she was different too. Lighter in some ways, heavier in others. Like she was letting go of something and carrying something else all at once. And I kept wanting to ask her about her life. About what happened after me, after college. After she called me a loser and walked away. But I never found the courage, because no matter how much I had changed, a part of me was still that boy under the diner awning, soaked and shattered. And maybe I was afraid of what she'd say. Afraid that her answer would undo everything I'd built to forget her. And then one afternoon, she found the picture. The one I'd accidentally left on the kitchen desk. The only photo of us I hadn't burned, us at the lake, arms tangled, her head resting on my chest. Both of us grinning like we had the world in our hands. And I walked in just as she was staring at it. Frozen, her fingers trembling over the glass. And when she looked up at me, her eyes were already wet. And she said, "This is you," not as a question, but as a quiet realization. And I nodded, slow and silent. And she let out this broken sound, half laugh, half slabond, whispered, "It's your house, isn't it?" And I could only nod again, because my voice had completely abandoned me. And then she sat down, like her knees had given out, and she covered her mouth with her hands. And I didn't know if she was going to scream, or collapse or run. So I just stood there, heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs open. And finally, she looked up at me with this expression I still can't name. A mixture of grief, awe, shame, and something like love. And she said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And I wanted to say everything. I wanted to unload the years of silence and pain and grinding effort, and nights spent imagining this exact moment. But all that came out was, "I didn't know what you'd do," and she nodded like she understood more than I was saying, and she said, "I would have left." And we sat there in that truth, both of us wounded, both of us older, more tired than we had any right to be at our age. And then she said, "I deserved that," and I shook my head, because suddenly revenge felt like a weapon I no longer had the strength to hold. And I said, "Maybe, but I didn't want to hurt you. I just needed to know I could become something." And her eyes broke all over again, and she said, "You didn't need to prove anything, not to me, not to anyone." And I wanted to scream that yes, I did, because the world doesn't give mercy to boys with big dreams and empty pockets. Because when someone you love calls you worthless, it tattoos itself across your soul. And I spent years trying to peel it off with success, and now that I'd done it, now that I had her in front of me, all I felt was hollow, like the victory was a costume that no longer fit. And she reached out then, touched my hand so gently, I thought I'd imagined it. And she said, "I was so angry back then, at myself, at everything. And I took it out on you because you were the only good thing I could break without consequences." And I didn't say anything, just let the silence wrap around us like a blanket we didn't deserve. And then she said, "If I asked you to forgive me, would you?" And it was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. And for a second, I hated her for it, because it meant I had to decide, not just for her, but for myself. If I was ready to let go of everything I'd carried like armor, if I could open the wound again, just to let it finally close properly. And I said, "I don't know, Madison, I want to, I think I do." And she nodded, and we sat there, two broken people in a mansion made of silence and history. And I realized then that this wasn't the end of anything, it was the beginning of something I didn't know how to name. Yet, maybe not forgiveness, not love, not reconciliation, but something real, something earned, and I could feel the ground shifting beneath us, not collapsing, just changing, slowly, and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of where it might take us next. The days began to blur, her presence becoming something steady, something I counted on more than I cared to admit. And each time she stepped through that door with her soft good morning, I felt the tension in my chest tighten like a fist, because I was losing the edge, the righteous fire that had carried me through the years of becoming, and replacing it was this quiet ache, this confusing desire to just talk to her, not to expose the truth, not to exact revenge, but to hear her, understand her, as if understanding her now would somehow rewrite who we were back then. And I hated myself for it, for softening, for letting her laughter in the hallway or the way she tucked her hair behind her ear make me forget the wreckage she left in her wake. And yet I couldn't stop watching her, couldn't stop waiting for those brief, unguarded moments when her smile cracked and I saw the sorrow underneath. And it made me wonder what had happened to her after me, if life had humbled her too, if she'd fallen and no one caught her. And one afternoon she was cleaning the library, the one room I never touched, the only one that still had traces of who I was before the money, and I saw her pause in front of the shelf with the journals, the ones I used to scribble business plans in back when I couldn't afford rent but believed I'd change the world. And she pulled one out, the blue one with the frayed spine, and my name scrawled inside, and she sat down with it, slowly, as if drawn by something she didn't understand, and she read, page after page. And I stood behind the half-open door, frozen in breathless terror, wondering if this was the moment it all came crashing down. But she didn't gasp or cry or storm out instead. She traced the words with her fingers like they were fragile and sacred, and I could see her lips moving, reading under her breath. And I heard her whisper, "Ryan," not loudly, not even with certainty, like she was saying it to test the sound. And my heart broke and soared and panicked all at once. And I backed away, fled to my room like a coward, because I wasn't ready not yet to end the next day. She didn't come, no call, no message, just absence. And it gutted me in a way I wasn't prepared for, because this wasn't how I wanted it to go. Not in silence, not in unfinished questions. And I paced the floors like a ghost haunting my own home, wondering if she hated me, if she was disgusted or ashamed or angry, or if maybe she was just scared. And 2 days later she returned, quieter than before, eyes darker, like something inside her had cracked and leaked out. And she didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't look at me, just moved through the house like she was floating. And I couldn't take it, I couldn't stand the distance. So I asked her if she was okay, and she said, "Do you believe people deserve second chances?" And the question hit me like a wave of cold water, because it wasn't just a question, it was a confession, a hope, maybe even a plea. And I said yes, too quickly, too desperately. And she looked at me, really looked at me, like she was trying to peel the truth from my face. And I thought, this is it, she knows, she's putting it all together. But then she just nodded and said, "Good," and walked away. And that night I sat alone in the dining room drinking whiskey I didn't even like, replaying every word we'd exchanged since she first walked in here as a stranger, trying to understand what game we were playing now, if she was pretending not to know, or if I was still just a ghost in her world. And then I heard her cry, soft, muffled, from behind the guest room door, "And I stood outside of it like I had 3 years ago, outside the diner, heart hammering, mouth dry, drowning in the weight of what I could do and what I should do, and I wanted to knock, to hold her, to say her name. But I didn't. I let her cry alone, just like she let me once. And maybe that was justice, or maybe it was cowardice. But I stayed outside her door until the crying stopped, and the next morning I left her favorite coffee on the counter with a note that simply said, "Forgive yourself." And I didn't sign it. Didn't need to, because when she saw it, she smiled broken, soft, full of memories and whispered, "You always said that," and I swear my heart cracked open like thunder, because that was the first time I knew for certain that she remembered. Not just the name in the journal, not just the dreams we buried, but me, the boy she loved and then left, and now here we were, not strangers, not lovers, not enemies, but something suspended in the space between who we were and who we became. And I knew the clock was ticking, that soon I'd have to tell her, that this delicate, wordless understanding wouldn't last forever. But I didn't know how to say it. Didn't know how to hand her the truth without also handing her the pain. And I wondered when it all comes out, will she thank me for the second chance, or hate me for the silence that bought it? I started leaving small clues, not out of malice, but curiosity. Breadcrumbs of the man I used to be, wondering if any part of her could still trace the outline of who I was before the fire, before the money, before the scars that no one sees. But that shaped me into this polished, armored version of myself. So I left an old hoodie, the one she used to steal when she was cold, hanging on the back of the basement door. And when she found it, I saw the hesitation in her hands, the pause that lingered a second too long as she picked it up and stared at the frayed sleeves. And for a moment I thought maybe, just maybe, recognition flickered behind her eyes. But she folded it and placed it gently on the storage shelf, like a memory she didn't have permission to open, and I started speaking to her in passing, brief interactions masked in formality. "Thank you. The place looks great," or "You didn't have to clean that room," just enough to study her face, to feel her presence. And every time she responded with a soft smile, and that same melodic tone I once knew better than my own thoughts, it chipped at my chest. Not with affection, but with this strange, bitter nostalgia that made me question if I was healing, or just hiding the wound beneath gold-plated armor. And she talked sometimes, in little bursts, when she thought I was just the assistant, or house manager, or whatever title she'd given me in her head. She'd say things like, "This house feels too quiet," or "I wonder what kind of man lives here." And I wanted to laugh, to say, "You used to know him," but instead I just nodded, biting my tongue until it bled invisible truths. And she never asked for much, never snipped, never acted entitled, and part of me hated how dignified she was, how gracefully she moved through this twisted irony without even knowing it. And it made me think, had I changed more than she had, or was I just finally seeing her for who she really was? Not the villain of my past, but just another broken person, trying to survive. And that complicated everything, because revenge is easy when your enemy is a monster. But what do you do when they're just human? Just tired and lost and soft-spoken? And I found myself noticing the little things again. The way she brushed stray hairs behind her ear, the quiet hum she made when she wiped the counters, the deep sighs she exhaled after finishing a room. And one night, late, when the house was cloaked in silence, I watched her from the staircase as she stood in the kitchen drinking water from a mug, barefoot, shoulders bare under a loose shirt, and for a second it was like nothing had changed, like time hadn't ravaged us, and I wanted to step into that moment, to say her name, and hear her say mine. But I stayed frozen, chained by my own history, because how do you reconcile the person who abandoned you with the one standing in your kitchen, looking like a forgotten dream? And the next day she looked tired, like she hadn't slept. And when I asked if she was okay genuinely, not out of habit, she gave me this look, this almost frightened glance, like I'd crossed some invisible boundary. And she said, "I'm fine," the way people do when they're anything but. And something shifted in me, something small but undeniable. A seed of guilt maybe, or empathy, or that old disease called love that I thought I'd burned out of my system. And that night I went to the guest room where she stayed, where I pretended I didn't know every detail, and I left a note, unsigned. Simple: "You're not invisible. I see you." And I don't know why I did it. Maybe to confuse her, maybe to comfort her, maybe to feel like I still mattered in her story, even if she didn't know I was writing it. And the next morning, she moved slower than usual, eyes scanning the walls and corners like the house had become a puzzle, and I saw her check the guest room twice, and then a third time, and when she came downstairs, she was quiet, more careful, like she could feel the gaze I never turned away. And that day she asked questions about the house, the owner, if I worked for him long, if he was always away. None. I lied, smoothly. Told her he was a tech entrepreneur, private, eccentric, barely ever home. And she nodded like it all made sense. And then she said, "Whoever he is, he's lucky to have someone who cares about the house this much." And I didn't know how to respond to that, because I wanted to scream, "It's me, Madison. I'm the man you gave up on. I'm the loser you walked away from. And I built this with my bare hands." But instead I said, "He's not as lucky as he thinks." And she smiled sadly, like she knew what it was to be overlooked. And for the first time, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow, like maybe this game had gone on too long, like maybe I'd become the villain of my own story, and the worst part was, I didn't know how to stop, how to reveal the truth without tearing open the old wounds we both tried to bury, and so I stayed silent, letting the weight of what I knew press against the walls of my chest, hoping something would give before I did, because part of me wanted her to figure it out on her own, to connect the dots, to look at me, and finally, see the man she left behind not as a failure, but as someone who became everything she said he never could. And yet another part of me feared what would come next, because if she knew, if she realized the truth, would she stay, or would she run? Again, and which would hurt more, her absence or her presence forged by shame?